Hello everyone, welcome on our webinar. Today we will guide you through a bit into the world of regexes. But before doing that, let me just do a quick housekeeping. The webinar is recorded and it will be uploaded to our website, and you will receive an email with the YouTube link as well. The presentation itself will be around 45 minutes long, and then we will have about 15 minutes to answer all of your questions. Please make sure that you use the Q&A pane of the Zoom panel. And that's it about the housekeeping, and let me just talk you a bit about our presenter today, who will be Márton Jánosy, who is a business solution architect at EDIMART. He worked there as a language engineer and a project manager as well. He's a self-taught programmer and loves all the things about technology and innovation. So, Márton, let me hand the mic over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen, and here we go. So, welcome to this presentation, and thank you, Bence, for the introduction. As you can probably guess from all these positions that I've held and that Bence referred to, I've had my fair share of having to use Regex. And I decided to choose a title that refers to a love story, although we know that this isn't always a love story with Regex. And part of what I'll try to do today is to show you that just like in love, there is heaven and there's also hell, Regex too has its bright side and its dark side. So it's something that people tend to have a paradoxical relationship with. It's something we love to hate, or maybe at best hate to love. So in the abstract of this presentation, I've painted a picture which probably looked like some magical wonderland where you just have to wave your magic wand, which is Regex, and everything becomes possible. And that's like Regex heaven, right? And I probably gave you the idea that this isn't even very hard to do. Like, it's not a big deal. But because you registered for this event, I guess you deserve the truth. And if the title and the topic didn't fill you with sheer terror, I think that we have to face the facts. And I have to tell you that you probably know that Regex has something about it that's despicable and smells like death. So let's face it, it's 2023 and Regex is technology from the 1950s. So you might ask, what the hell am I trying to do here? Trying to teach you new tricks with such an old piece of technology. And I agree that any discussion of Regex today has to necessarily include a discussion of how it's being replaced or at least complemented by other technologies. So while I will share some of my favorite applications of Regex, I will also argue that in the coming years we'll be using less and less of it. So we'll explore where Regex may no longer be the best solution, and just as we'll delve into the heaven of Regex, we'll also journey into the depths of hell, where its limitations and frustrations become apparent. So on this journey through the Regex universe, we'll be guided by 3 rules, and they are necessarily arbitrary because we could fill entire libraries with the do's and don'ts of Regex inside and outside memoQ. But I've chosen these three rules because I think that they illustrate very well the highs, the lows, and the in-between. It's like a map from regex heaven to regex hell. And once we've descended into the depths, we'll circle back and talk a little bit about newer technologies and how they might just redeem us from regex hell that we sometimes find ourselves in. So let's get started with the heavenly applications. And rule number one is a simple one. It's a straightforward yet very powerful rule. When you do a find and replace, search and replace within memoQ, it is almost always a better idea to opt for regex-based search and replace. And the reason is because it opens up possibilities that plain search cannot, and it will make your work both more efficient and more precise. And that's because in language, we work with patterns. So you can, for instance, combine multiple searches into one. You can check segmentation by filtering segments that start with a lowercase character or that do not end in punctuation. And you would probably ideally want to combine those searches into a single search. So you can do that very easily with regex. That's the straightforward application of regex-based search and replace. But something else which I think we tend to forget, and what I want to show you through 3 examples here, is that the other great thing about regex-based search and replace is that you can not only find patterns, but you can also freely restructure and reorganize them in a way that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So it allows you to manipulate your capture groups and your patterns that you find. So let's see an example of how that works. Here's a document. This is the source document we received from a client. It's a registration form in English. So obviously the task is to translate it. So you import it into memoQ, you translate it, and you end up with its Hungarian version. And this is what it looks like after export. Now, then you send it back to your client, and he's not happy because it turns out that this is what he expected, a bilingual format. He probably forgot to tell you this small detail. You can see that these source strings are separated by the target strings by 2 forward slashes. So it can be read by speakers of both languages. And while it may seem a simple task, when you have a large document, it becomes a question of how you automate this process. And obviously you have many options. You can use an external application that can do this. You can write a script that will do this for you. I want to show you that you can also do this very easily using regex-based find and replace. So what you want to do is open up your project in memoQ. Obviously, this is what it looks like. And then if you open up your find and replace dialog, you will have to search for basically anything and any number of any characters, which is represented by this infamous regex sequence dot star, which is basically what I just told you. Dot represents any character, star means 0 or more, and you have 2 anchors at the beginning and at the end. So you have the caret character, which means the beginning of the segment, and you have its closing counterpart, the $sign, which means the end of the segment. So basically we'll match any and every segment and everything in that given segment. And we'll replace it by itself twice. In other words, we are duplicating this. So that's what you can see. $1 means the first capture group, which is the whole segment. Then we have 2 forward slashes and the same thing again. And once we've done that, we end up with something like this. You can also see that I actually ticked the box source text, so I'm only modifying the source segment. And now what I want to do is resegment my document. Now, segmentation rules are also based on regex. So let's see how to do that. It's a very simple rule because it's quite literal. I type in 2 forward slashes and then I have the end of the segment basically. So that's a simple segmentation rule. I want memoQ to break a segment wherever it sees 2 forward slashes. And then the question becomes, what do I do now? Because I should re-import the document in order to be able to resegment it. But if I do that, then the problem is I will lose my replacements. So the only other way to resegment the document in memoQ is by adding an abbreviation. So this is sort of like a hack because I don't really need this functionality. I'm just kind of trying to use a secondary feature of this function. So I'm going to add an abbreviation. You should make sure that it doesn't show up in your document because that will lead to problems. And then you tick the box, resegment this document now, and then you end up with just what you wanted. And I think the rest is quite straightforward. You filter your document and you want to collect all segments that end in those 2 forward slashes, copy the source to the target side, and you lock them. And then you pre-translate the rest. And that's exactly how it should look before export. So if you export this, then you end up with the format you want it to. So you have just automated an arguably complex process using a very simple regular expression and some creative use of memoQ's functionalities. Now let me show you another example of a simple problem solved by simple use of regex. Some localization formats, such as the resx format, will import a comment in each segment, and that comment will contain information that relates to the context. Now, I think that's actually bad practice. I don't think that this is a very wise thing to do, because that's why you have the preview window, and I think it's enough when you can see those contextual pieces of information in the preview window only, and you should avoid cluttering the translation space. But unfortunately, very often by the time this issue is noticed, it's often too late, because your translator might have already populated a number of rows with essential and important comments that you will want to check. And then those meaningful comments become needles in a haystack, buried under the automatic comments that memoQ brought in with each row. So that means that you as a PM cannot distinguish between the automatically generated context and the translator's remarks. So let's see how regex-based search and replace can help here. Now, again, you have a number of options. I'll show you 2. And then the third one you can do as an exercise. But one of the things you can do is, again, look for anything in the comment box. So you'll use the dot again, you'll use the plus sign this time, because that means 1 or more. So any character 1 or more, and you will want to use the anchors again. So that will give you a list of all the rows with comments, which basically means every row. So now you will have to look for rows that appear more than once in this pane. And you can see that row number 3 appears twice. So you're looking for duplicates really. And that's where you'll find the important comments. That's not the most elegant way to do this, but this is foolproof because it won't give you any false negatives. In other words, you will see all of those important comments. Now, a slightly more dangerous way of doing this would be to look for comments that contain white spaces. So assuming that your translator is not communicating in single word comments, this could work, and this will list all of the comments that he or she left. Problem is, of course, if his or her comments do not contain a white space, then it won't show up. And what you can also do is you can look for segments that are not in Pascal case, which means each word within the string begins with a capital letter and there are no spaces between. So I think your translator is very unlikely to communicate in Pascal case. So that's left for you as an exercise. Think about it. I think the possibilities here are endless. I just wanted to show you how you can solve a problem like this using regex. Okay, and one last thing, which is probably the simplest of the three examples related to this rule, is, well, sometimes during the translation projects, we come across tag errors, and I think we all know this dialog box all too well. These errors can be a real headache, and especially if you're on a tight deadline, re-importing and pre-translating the whole document is not always the way to go. And a more time-efficient solution can be to simply export the file and deal with the tag issues outside memoQ, so externally. And to do this, you can use a regex trick that's unique to memoQ, because memoQ comes with special regexes for tags. The \tag means, well, as you can guess, it means any kind of tag that appears in the document. If you replace that by nothing, then you will have effectively cleaned all the tags from the source and the target and everywhere else where they may appear in the document. Obviously, you have to be careful because tags exist for a reason. But believe me, this little trick might just save your days sometimes, because often it's easier to address these problems outside memoQ than inside. So I've seen many cases where this little trick just saved the day. Okay, time to go on to rule number 2. And with rule number 2, we're approaching the land in between heaven and hell. And to illustrate this, I will be talking about the regex text filter, which can be your best friend, but also your worst enemy. And the reason is because once you've got a taste of the power of the regex text filter, it's tempting to think of it as a go-to solution for any text-based format that is not supported out of the box by memoQ. But there's a catch, because the fact that something is text-based doesn't mean that it will be effectively parsed by regex. It can lead to issues. It's a bit like the old saying, when the only tool you have a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. And so that's not really an ideal situation. So while regex is fantastic for dealing with straightforward linear structures, rule number 2 basically says do not use regex for recursive formats. Avoid regex for nested structures like XML or Markdown, where regex may fall short. It's not built to understand the depth and the context of nested structures. So you may be able to force it to work to some extent, but it's not efficient, and the end result is often far from ideal. So you'll likely see parsing errors or a complete misunderstanding or misinterpretation of the file structure. Let me show you what I mean by this, and let's stick with Markdown. On the screen, you can see an example Markdown document. Markdown is a format which is very popular. It's but it's notoriously difficult to parse. It's a favorite for documentation platforms like GitHub, for writing content, or even for taking simple notes, because it's readable and it's easy to use. But Markdown comes in many flavors, each with subtle differences. But that's not the only reason why tools like memoQ still don't support it. The problem is that parsing Markdown with a simple custom regex-based filter in memoQ is simply not advisable. I'll tell you the alternatives, but let's just first look into where it works and where it doesn't work on a file like this. So some aspects of Markdown are easily parsed and easily handled with regex. If you think about the formatting of headings, where you have different levels, header 1 to header 6 are represented by 1 to 6 hash signs, and that's very easy to match with a regex expression. The one you can see on the screen, you have a hash mark 1 up to 6 of them, which is followed by a white space, which is followed by any number of any characters, and that's the end of it basically. And then you can think about other formatting like bold. Bold in Markdown is marked by 2 stars at the beginning of a string and 2 stars at the end. So you can match that with the pattern that you can see at the bottom of the screen. You have 2 stars followed by any number of anything which matches the capture group in a non-greedy fashion. So that means you don't want to catch the last 2 stars of the string within this capture group, and that's followed by 2 stars. So that's pretty simple and straightforward and no problem at all. But then you have lists and other recursive items. So basically, you by recursion, what we mean is we have a structure inside a structure inside a structure and so on. And that hierarchical relationship is not captured by regex. So while you can use a pattern, hyphen followed by white space and 1 or more of any character, that you will be able to import all of these strings. But the problem is, if you look at this example, you have the word cancel. When it's nested under appointments, then it probably refers to canceling an appointment, assuming that this is a Markdown list of UI elements of some website or some application. Now, if you look at the other instance of cancel, you can see it appears directly under menu. So it's probably a menu element in and of itself. And so it refers to closing the menu or maybe canceling the operation you're doing in the menu, something like that. So depending on that, you may have different translations for each occurrence of the word cancel. And so this limitation, I think, illustrates why regex is not suitable for parsing nested or recursive structures. Something that you can do instead is you can always think about conversion. So Markdown can be converted into HTML. You can, I think you can easily find free converters. And as you know, memoQ handles HTML without a problem. So you can import it as HTML, do the translation, preserve the hierarchical structure and the recursive elements, and then you can convert it back into MD. I realize that this is a bit more tedious than coming up with a clever regex text filter, but I think that this is the way to go, and that's one apparent problem that you should be aware of when you're using the regex text filter. And so with rule number 3, we're opening the gates of hell. This is what I will call the rule of thumb. Because if your regex is longer than your thumb, then you have to think about the possibility that this is not a problem that you will solve with regex. All of the examples that we've discussed so far involved relatively simple regex patterns, and that's no accident. So when a regular expression becomes overly complex, it can turn into a nightmare. It becomes difficult to write, it becomes difficult to read and a challenge to work with, and often you'll find that it doesn't even work as intended, and you can keep making it longer and longer, and at the end you won't understand why it won't work or why it will work. And so that brings to mind a famous quote by Jamie Zawinski, a renowned hacker, who said, well, some people when confronted with a problem think, well, I know I'll use regular expressions, and then they have two problems. So let me give you an illustration of this. We'll exemplify this rule with the problem of parsing Roman numerals with regex. And at first glance, it may seem like a straightforward pattern recognition problem, classic regex problem, literally classic. However, the intricacies of Roman numerals make creating a comprehensive regex pattern exceedingly complex. So it's not just about recognizing characters, it's also about understanding their order, the repetition, and the context. So crafting a regex that can accurately capture all valid Roman numerals while excluding invalid combinations quickly escalates the complexity and becomes a prime example of regex hell. So this complexity illustrates how a tool as powerful as regex can become unwieldy and counterproductive when it's pushed beyond its practical limits. So let's go back to school for a moment. And to keep things very simple, let's just focus on numbers 1 to 9. And what you can see is basically we have 3 characters. We have the I, we have the V, and we have the X. X stands for 10, V is 5, and I is 1. And then 1, 2, and 3, that's quite straightforward. The addition of 1, 1 plus 1, 1 plus 1 plus 1. Then you have 4 and 9, which pattern together. You can see that there is subtraction involved there. So 4 is 1 less than 5, and 9 is 1 less than 10. And you have 5, 6, 7, and 8, where you have V standing for 5. And if it's 1 more than 5, then it's VI. If it's 2 more than 5, then VII, and so on. So that's basically the logic. Now, what can we do? Well, if you're not really creative, and if you really only have to match numbers 1 to 9, you can do something like this. And that's a brute force solution, which will work because it will capture all the numerals. And the problem is there are a number of key reasons why this isn't the ideal approach. So what you can see in this pattern is basically a list of all the possibilities separated by this pipe character, which means or. So I, or 2 I's, or 3 I's, or and so on. So the problem is this regex pattern is a simple enumeration of options. And you can imagine if you want to apply this to a range which is greater than the range 1 to 9, for instance, you want to do all the numbers from 1 to 100 or 1 to 1,000, then you can imagine that your pattern will become impractically long. It would be a never-ending list. It's also inefficient for the same reason the pattern will check each possibility one by one. And for longer numerals, it will take more time as it goes through each option until it finds a match or exhausts all possibilities. There's also no pattern recognition involved, and that's the real problem here, because this approach doesn't leverage regex's true power, which is pattern recognition. So good regex patterns obviously identify and exploit the underlying structure of the data. And in the case of Roman numerals, the pattern revolves around the placement and the repetition of characters and not just listing out each possible numeral. And then there's also the problem of maintainability. So a pattern like this is hard to maintain or modify. And if the requirements change or if there's a need to extend the range, then you'd have to manually update the entire pattern. So it may work for a very limited set of data, but it fails to utilize the efficiency and elegance that regex is known for. So that's a brute force method that lacks sophistication and adaptability. So let's see what else we can do. Here we have the simple but dirty solution, and the reason why I call it that is because indeed it's very simple. You can see a character group. In the squared brackets, you have the characters I, V, and X, which means I'm looking for any of these characters. The plus sign means I'm looking for one or more of them. The problem is if you have a pattern like this, it will also match invalid Roman numerals. We've seen that you cannot really subtract 3 from 5, so that's not how you represent 2. And then you have X, I, X, and VV. Those are all invalid Roman numerals, so you will end up with false positives, while you will also correctly have all the correct matches as well. You will have a large list of false positives. So again, that's the wrong solution. So let's see the right solution, or let's see if there is even one. Obviously, we have to look for patterns. And we should recognize that 4 and 9 pattern together because of the subtraction thing. And so do 1, 2, 3, and 6, and 7, and 8 because of the addition. So we can craft a pattern for both. You can see in red the pattern for 4 and 9. We have I, which is followed by either X or V. Okay, and exactly one of those. Then we have the slightly more complex pattern for the rest of the numbers. We have an optional V at the end. So that's represented by the question mark, which is followed by an I, 0 or 3 of those I's. Okay, and when you combine those two parts of the pattern, you end up with, well, either A or B. So it's either the red thing or the green thing. You have the pipe in between the two, which means it's an either or optional, it's an alternative thing. And if you create a QA rule, it looks something like this. You want to edit your QA settings, and you will have to tick the box, use regular expression checks, otherwise it won't work. I've set up a warning for a missing regex replacement in the target. You can see the source regex, which is exactly what we've discussed, and replacement should be the same. Let's assume that these numbers should show up in the same format in the target language as they do in the source language, and you get a custom warning, missing Roman number in target. And if you do that, then you'll realize that there's something very interesting going on here. I have a single segment here with the Roman numeral 9, so only one Roman numeral here, which is indeed missing from the target. As you can see, I've deleted it, but I have an endless list of warnings in the QA. And, well, that shows one of the complicated aspects of crafting a smart regex expression. Because if you think about it, let's go back to our pattern again. And I told you the pattern is basically either A or B, and there's no problem with the left side, the A side. The problem arises from the way we've defined the alternative solution, the right side of the regex pattern, because I told you there's an optional V, which is followed by an optional I. So in other words, nothing followed by nothing is still a valid match. And we have an endless list of empty strings in these segments. So they all show up in the QA. So let's see what we can do to fix this problem, the problem of null strings. What you will want to do is define the boundaries. So you'll say anything that's captured by the pattern should fit between two boundaries. And the boundary here is represented by \b, which stands for a word boundary, basically, because remember the anchors for the string boundary, the caret and the $sign, they are reserved for segment start and segment end. So this is how you can define string boundaries within memoQ. And that's great because it seems to work. It correctly identifies the missing 9 and nothing else. And then you start using your pattern. You can also expand it. Well, it's getting longer than my thumb, so it may be a problem, but I'd say you can get away with it. Okay, this is acceptable still. You can also see that basically, as you can see, each part of this long regex is based on the simpler pattern that we've just discussed. You have something for the thousands and the hundreds and the 500s. You have something for the 50s and the 10s. But basically the same idea repeated for each decimal place. Okay, well, let's see how that works. We have a segment. Let's focus on the source text, okay? In subsection 3, the focus is on daily life, where phrases like "I walked through the forum" and "he wore an Excel tunic" paint a vivid picture. That text makes no sense at all. That's utter nonsense. But it goes to show that even if you have a seemingly correct and sophisticated pattern, which I don't think we can make any better, you will run into problems. One of the problems is you have the pronoun I in the source, and your very clever and very sophisticated regex pattern has captured that as a Roman numeral. You also have XL, which is short for extra large, and it's not the number 40, but your rule, your regex pattern is blind to that because it's a mechanical rule. It doesn't make sense of those words and their context. And the only Roman numeral that you can see here, which is the lowercase 3, I, that's not matched. Now, I think you can easily fix this latter problem. So you can include Roman numerals even if they're lowercase characters. That will make your pattern twice as long. But still, I say, if that's your only problem, do it. But you'll very soon realize that the length of your regular expression is proportional to the complexity of the task. And regex is not designed to solve complex tasks, period. So now it's time to talk about what we can do in these cases. And that will sort of paint a picture of the future and how we will probably start using other solutions where regex falls short. To demonstrate this, I built a little application. And since nowadays everything is about AI, and this is 2023, and AI models can understand context and grammar and nuances in language. They provide a more flexible and sophisticated solution for QA checks. And I think that these AI-based solutions can potentially understand and evaluate text much like a human would, but faster and on a larger scale. So while the integration of AI-based QA checks is not yet available in memoQ, I'm more or less certain that solutions like these will become very widespread very soon. And in the meantime, we can automate everything outside memoQ, as you will see, and that's captured in the flowchart. We will export the XLIF document of the project. We can simply build an application that will parse the XLIF, check the segments using AI, and then mark those problems, and we can re-import the XLIF. So obviously we will have to specify what we want to check in the prompt. So we're no longer thinking about regexes, but rather we're thinking about crafting clever prompts. Now, I don't know, honestly, if this prompt is a reliable one or a good one or an efficient one. And that's the only prompt I've tried. It actually failed when I used the DaVinci 3 model, which is a completion model. I'm not sure why, probably because this is not a completion problem. It told me there were no Roman numerals in my text at all. But then when I switched to GPT-4, which is our chat model, then it began to work as if by magic. So I used the prompt you can see on the screen. You can see I'm asking for 3 different outputs, or one of 3 outputs. Either if the source text doesn't contain a Roman numeral, let me know. If it does, then check with the translation and tell me if there's a difference or if it's the same. I used the max token setting 150 so as to constrain things, and the default temperature. And here's what I got. So you can see in segment 1, it says there's no Roman numeral. In segment 2, the Roman numeral 9 is the same as in the translation, which is true, which is correct. In segment 3, we have a problem. If you look at segment 3, we have section 5 in the source, but 6 in the translation, so it's pointed out. And in segment 4, the lowercase 3 is identified correctly, but XL is not recognized, and the pronoun I is not recognized as a Roman numeral, which is exactly what we wanted to solve, okay? And from here, I think it doesn't take too much creativity to start thinking about the automatic correction of the detected errors, which is exactly what I did. I added the part in red to my prompt, and I got the following result. So basically, if you remember, segment 1 and 2 should be the same. And then we had a problem in segment 3. You can also see it's taking a little longer because it's really thinking about the correction. And there is my correction. Actually, the problem is it also changed the translation somewhat. And I don't know if it changed for the better or for the worse. But I think that would open up a whole other conversation on prompt engineering. So it goes to show that for these kinds of problems, I don't think regex is the way to go anymore. And to sum up this discussion, I'd like to make some comments on what I think will happen to regex in memoQ in the future, and where we should start thinking in terms of other solutions. So I think that regex-based tool tools have been the backbone of text processing for years, and there's no doubt that they will stick with us for tasks like segmentation. So regex is great for dividing texts into segments, and that's a foundational step which we'll continue to use. No question about that. Like I said, search and replace, still the precision of regex in identifying and replacing strings will continue to be indispensable for editing and processing documents. We'll continue to use it for simple QA rules, so character length checks, number checks, checking for extra characters. I'm sure that we will continue to use it for tagging placeholders and for some custom file formats, especially the non-recursive ones. But I think that regex will have to go when it comes to complex QA, such as the Roman numerals problem. And then you can think about a number of other problems where, you might have this feeling that your regex is becoming very long and your problem is not really getting solved. And auto translation rules would be another prime example of what not to do with regex in 2023. So date conversion, time conversion, or transliteration problems. I think those are better done and better handled by other tools. And so with that, I'd like to conclude, and I'd like to thank you for your attention. And Bence, I think it's time for the questions.
Yes, thank you very much for this presentation. It was a really, really great one. And I think that DALL-E illustrations were really lovely to see them there. And while we are talking about AI, the first question is that given that LLMs are given to hallucinations, isn't an AI solutions also prone to create problems?
Yes, well, like I said, that would open up a whole other discussion, and I think that would deserve a webinar of its own. The reason why I mentioned some of the parameters that I used, let me go back. So I used the default temperature. The temperature setting of an LLM is basically what you can play around with when you want to prevent hallucination, or if you can sort of dial down the temperature, so the answers of the LLM will be more reliable and convergent and predictable the lower your temperature. And basically, so if you set that to low enough, then you can expect less hallucination, which may be what you want when you're using it for something like this. And for more creative applications, when you want it to write a poem, obviously that's when you need higher temperatures. So that's all I can say about it. But I agree that as long as we haven't tested this application and this prompt thoroughly, we cannot trust it 100%. So that's one of the reasons why I didn't change anything when I saw that it changed the translation as well, because I wanted to show you that it will have its problems too. So yeah, I agree.
Thank you very much. The second one is, do you have a favorite regex tool or a thing that can help you write regexes?
Yes. I don't know if, obviously, there's no sponsorship involved, but I do find regex body helpful tool, but you can also find regex testing environments online where you can just copy and paste your text, and you can test your regex expression on that text before you actually apply it. So you can just Google regex test engines, whatever, and I use this standalone software called regex body, which is also great. you can actually save your regexes. And I know that memoQ also has its own regex library where you can save your own regexes. It's a good idea too. Once you find that one of your regex patterns works as expected, it's a good idea to save them.
Thank you. We have one rather comment than a question, I think. Someone added that ChatGPT is good with regexes. I don't know if you want to say anything about that part.
I mean, just like humans, it's good with simple regexes. That's what I found. So if your problem is simple, it will probably give you the right solution. If your problem is a complex one, then just like a human, it will fail. And if you cannot validate what ChatGPT suggests as a solution or as a regex pattern, then you have another problem. So I wouldn't recommend just mindlessly accepting whatever it tells you to use. And I would only use it for simple problems, just like I said. Even if you craft your expressions yourself, you should focus on simple patterns and simple problems and not the complex one necessarily.
And if there's no more questions, then let me just thank you for the presentation again, Márton. It was a really, really nice one. I hope our audience liked it as well. And thank you again. Have a good rest of the day and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Benza, and goodbye.